What's going on, Badger Nation? Welcome to the PPC Den podcast, the world's first and longest running show all about Amazon paid traffic. I'm super stoked today. I was not expecting to record an episode on this topic, but it was awesome. For the last couple of months, we've been doing a follow along with Michael Tejeda, who's a PPC manager here at AdBadger, about a product that he was managing that was in position 1 for BSR. And we talked about, over the last few months, some struggles with a new competitor knocking him out of that top spot. And what I think is so awesome about this episode, we did an update today. So we started recording that in November. And the update here, which I'm recording in mid-February, is that he basically now has 4 products in the top 10. And the net sales is way increased. So I think an awesome title for this episode is how he launched 54 campaigns and some of the other things that he did to push not one product in the top 10, but 4 products in the top 10. So if you're struggling with the top spot, we're going to talk about some strategies to maybe help you get multiple products in the top 10 for a net sales increase. I thought it was really interesting. Demonstrates some really advanced PPC sort of skills and approaches, which I think you'll really enjoy. Have a good one, and I'll see you inside the episode.
I've launched campaigns and picked keywords. I've got my bids, set placements too, and bad mistakes. I've made a few. I've had my share of wrong keywords, but I've got through. We are the PPC Den, my friends, and we'll keep up the rising to the end. You two are the PPC Den. We talk about Amazon. No time for manicures, 'cause we fix the gambits of the world.
Michael, I'm really stoked because we were not going to talk about this topic. We're going to talk about other topics. We're going to think of new topics, but this one really is interesting. So for anyone who has been following along, we're recording this on February 16th. On January 27th, we released an episode, and the week before that, February 3rd, I'm sorry, I have my dates backwards, but January 27th and February 3rd, we released 2 episodes, and we recorded these over the course of many, many weeks. And we're doing this really cool BSR follow along where we're talking about how to basically reach market dominance and category dominance. And the last episode we did was, hey, there's lots of circumstances that first position that we've been knocked out of, we're just not going to get back. And we talked all about that. We're not going to rehash it here. Go back and go listen to those episodes. We'll link to them in the description. And then you threw me a massive curveball, which I was like, we have to talk about this. So I'm excited to get into this.
All right.
So basically, instead of being like, let's get that one product into BSR 1, you basically did something totally crazy, an absolute mad lad. What did you do instead?
Well, we decided to have multiple top 10 products. So that was the goal.
That was the goal. So now there are 4 products in the top 10 BSR instead of just like the one that we used to be at number 1 and then got knocked down to like 4, then got back up to 2 and 3, was sort of hanging out in the top 5. Now you're just like, you know what? Let's do 4. There's a bit, and the first question I asked was like, was there a net sales increase? Because everyone's always concerned, like typically the number 1 spot gets a massive amount of sales, so much so that you'd rather have the number 1 spot and only that rather than positions like 8, 9, and 10. Because like number 1 can sometimes get so many sales. But in this case, was there a sort of a net sales increase?
Oh yeah, that was a huge net sales increase. If we're looking at year-over-year numbers, we're upwards of 156% where we were last year at the same time. And I'm talking about number of units that are being sold, and then also just the overall revenue too.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is like it's a no-brainer, right? Because you didn't lose, because basically the long and the short of the story is like what happened to that first position. And like there were some intricacies. Everyone should go back and listen to the previous episodes where we talked about it. But just really quick, there was some uniqueness around that product that ended up knocking you out of that first BSR.
Right.
It was something like pricing. They were really crazy on pricing or something. Was
Yeah,
it?
it's kind of the product's a little bit different within the subnode, and then also its pricing too. It's like super super cheap, cheap, cheap.
Yeah, and this happens all the time. Like we get hyper focused on BSR. Well, sometimes Amazon's throwing several different types of products that aren't true competitors to
Right.
compete for the same node, which is so like there was some weirdness. So you sort of got stuck at number two,
Hmm.
and focusing a lot to try to get from number two to number one. And then I guess sort of a switch happened where it's like, what if we were to get number two? And I don't know the other positions, but it's like, I think I saw it was 2, 4,
2, 4, 6, and 7.
2, 4, 6, and 7. Okay. So yeah, so of course there was a net sales increase because you still have number two, you just added
Yeah.
many more. So this is what we're going to be talking about. And just sort of like recapping, I think it's so fascinating. We first started tracking this in 2022 in quarter four. And the thing that I first want to highlight for everyone is like doing PPC is an absolute marathon. Like doing marketing on Amazon is an absolute marathon. Hopefully I always try to preface everything on this show and like there's no flash in the pans. Like it's a process. You look, observe, you measure, you tweak, and this has been a long slog. And a lot of times you work on it, new information is revealed, and like a really talented campaign manager like looks and reflects. So I think it's crazy and really cool that we're still talking about this
Yeah.
in sort of mid-February 2023. So I want to touch on like that shifting of the strategy. Um, I know that there was hyper focus on that number one product, um, getting back to number one, sort of got stuck at number two. And then I want to talk about the conversation and the shift and strategy that led to getting in position 2, 4, 6. Did you say 8? Yeah.
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 Yep,
All
yep.
the even numbers. So I know that there were some SEO modifications on those other products that ended up in 4, 6, and 8. How did that come up? And like, was there anything notable about like the SEO?
Yeah. So just I looked again. It's 2, 4, 6, and 7. I know
Okay.
semantics, but what have you?
Okay.
And yeah, there was something that was done with the SEO portion of it. Yeah. So everything kind of evolved, and like you said, this is a marathon that we're involved in. So initially, it was a retooling of what was happening with the SEO. So the client re-engaged their SEO, redid everything for these PDPs, for these products that are leading the charge right now.
Mhm.
And essentially, it was just a rebuild of everything that was happening there. So that's where we started rebuilding. So that was the first initial step, was that, and then we moved to the next phase.
I can't describe how much joy it gives me and how much sort of like marketing maturity when like anyone does that, where it's like, hey, we have a product and it's just sort of like, let's actually look at the product and be sure the page is like perfectly optimized. And maybe we thought it was perfectly optimized many months ago. However, let's go relook at it. And lots of things were discovered. We don't have to get into all those details. We've got lots of content on like what to do and how to optimize a page that you thought was previously optimized. Do you know, like, what kinds of things were we talking about? Like rewriting the product title, re-looking at the the bullet points, like double checking everything. Like, do you know what kinds of activities were done?
Yeah, it was actually everything. It was a front to back SEO relook. So yeah, it was back end keywords.
Keyword research,
Yep,
yeah.
keyword research, title optimization, bullet point restructuring.
I
Even
love it.
at that point too, they kind of did some image updates too, and some A plus content updates. So
Hmm.
a little bit of that was touched too on some of the PDPs.
This sounds so amazing because so many times things will happen, sales might be down or something like that. And like the only tool in someone's tool set is often like it must be a PPC thing. And I think I think it's like so mature. It's like so mature to look at this and say, well, let's double check our products and to look at that and say, hey, there's a lot more that we could do here. And just sort of relooking at the keywords, like relooking at your initial keyword research that you did when you first launched it. I always tell people like the first time you do anything, so the first time you set up that product, it's going to be the worst you'll ever do because like 6 months from now,
Yeah,
you'll know so much more about the market. Like you'll know so much more about how that product behaves. And like then you'll know for sure. And now we have so many more tools that are in our tool set. Like you get individualized information on a per ASIN per search term basis. Like what's going to be the most valuable and highest opportunity now, and you probably did not 6 months ago. So it's timely. It's a really mature practice,
yeah,
and those kinds of things also boost conversion rate too.
for sure.
So we've got lots of content about how to work SEO, which we can link to in the description here. And I also think it's interesting to like this next thing that we're going to talk about is also not PPC related either, but it helps influence PPC in a big way. So like this is often forgotten. This is often a forgotten part of the Amazon marketing machine, which actually isn't really marketing. It's like sort of like the boring management of the product, like administration, like setting things up. Like, talk to me about what happened during this time too.
So there was a little bit of weirdness that was happening, and I don't know if other people out there are experiencing the same thing, but there's a lot of Amazon seems to be breaking up a lot of parentage, parentages. That's a weird word, across the board in multiple categories. I've seen it across three different categories within the last few months, and this is like you said, one of those boring portions of it, just monitoring stuff, making sure things are good to go and working continuously. Well, they've had some of their essentially their top sellers, those parentages, being broken up into single individual items. Now it's that process of re-getting or reconnecting them all and re-uploading a file, making sure things are all good and things are processing in the system and they get reattached. That is one of those things that, I mean, it's like, one of those things that you don't ever want to have to do on a
Hmm.
continuous basis, but this client is having to do it. And just the constant management of that and their attention to detail is just,
Hmm.
it's crazy. So they're on that level where they're looking at that every day.
I love it. So just monitoring this and ensuring that it's where you need it to be.
Yeah.
So this was happening. So this isn't really related to getting more products in the top 10 for BSR. It's more so if they didn't have this in place, it probably would have made everything a lot more challenging.
Yeah, so we're seeing some variances that where they actually had it broken apart, and then the BSR had a bit of a shift, and there was discussions about what can be done, what can we do, and ultimately it's just try to fix that mistake and get them reattached.
Yeah. So if anyone's following along at home, the flow chart for this has been reconsider all of your SEO, like start from scratch with all the new information that you have.
Yep.
Ensure that you have really good overall like Amazon management. Like someone on someone's team should be like periodically checking in on like, is everything configured the way that we want it to be configured? And obviously, the higher the stakes, the more frequent it should happen.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you mentioned some couponing and lightning deals.
Oh yeah.
How did you view these things? Like a boost? Like how did you think about that strategically?
Yeah, so every time that we hear that there is so there's two things to consider, right? With the couponing and lightning deals. One, sales volume and velocity, and then the other portion is the inventory that you have available to work with. Um, with FBA imposing a lot of new limitations on what can be sent to the FBA fulfillment warehouses, a lot of people are running up to those thresholds of max number of units that they can have in FBA at any time. So we're running into that issue. So we're selling a ton, but we're only able to have so much stock, right? So We continue to run out of some of these particular items, so we've come up with this sort of strategy to kind of flip flop between a couple different ASINs, and I think that's also sort of helped with getting multiple of those items up within the top 10. It actually has helped. So being at number 2, going back to that whole thing, was a godsend, because
Yeah.
it's made us kind of figure out all these other opportunities. So yeah, it's we've just had to deal with that portion of it, with the inventory portion of it, and then having to work through that whole system too.
Mm-hmm. As we get to the last topic, this is the most PPC one out of all of them, which was really campaign structure conversations. So it's so fascinating here because, like, if you're focused on one product, you do certain things for that one product, and you're trying to get that product back to number 1 position for BSR. So you're doing certain things to that one product. When we introduce, like, hey, we also want to rank for the other positions too. We want multiple in the top 10 here. Typically, the advice would be like, okay, like, now let's create separate campaigns for all these separate things. Tell me about that story.
So yeah, since we are running up to these issues, we're talking about couponing, accelerating velocity on that, lightning deals, and accelerating sales velocity, and then inventory issues. So we've had to essentially look at what should be the priority ASIN that we're advertising on, right? And if we're running out of stock, we need to switch that. So we've actually ended up with essentially a pairing for each one of these parentages that we are focusing on. So there's 2 different ASINs that we're continuously flip-flopping on to make sure that we have a lot of presence. And you were talking about segmentation. Segmentation is always one thing that we do talk about and always acknowledge that it works great. When we're flip-flopping, though, it kind of causes a little bit of chaos, I guess you can say, because essentially at that point you would have to shut off campaigns and then re-engage with some other ones. So we've kept a more across the board approach where we're supporting all of them all the time. And then there's also subsections of campaigns that we have that are supporting them on an individual basis as well too. So it's essentially like a scaffolding approach where we have a large base that we're working off of, always supporting, and then we dump in additional ad spend where we need to at any given moment.
This is really fascinating. So, yeah, of course, you don't want to ever pause a campaign or have a campaign like run out of stock and things like that. So, I think you'll have to repeat that. Tell me a little bit more about, like, the benefit in this case of keeping these sort of products together in the campaigns. So basically, what we're talking about for people's context is, sponsored product campaign. Typically, you would want single product campaigns that would typically perform best. And I think you mentioned in the pre-show, like, you did that and it, like, wasn't giving you what you wanted. So, like, recap your thought process again.
Right. So we did break out. Essentially, we did that. We did hyper segmented. We went individual ASIN, aligned keywords with that particular ASIN, and then did it in that manner. When we started to run into inventory issues and, of course, velocity issues, and we had to flip flop, and the parentages being broken apart,
I see.
we ended up running into issues, right? Because we were essentially now dumping in a lot of ad spend and a lot of focus on something that was not as highly rated. So now that we've taken a step back and we're approaching it more as a collective set of all of them, we're seeing that our BSR is maintaining and our sales position is maintaining. So that's one of the things that we learned from this. And as we start to know that we have stock and have additional stock that's coming into the queue, then we know that we can push on that one. So that's why I said we have these 2 ASINs that are our priorities. So we kind of flip flop. So one's all 100% of the time, gas on, full on throttle. And then we start to run out of stocks, back off. Let's push on the other one. And then we push on that one 100%. And with that approach, with them also being in that holistic collective campaign, or a number of campaigns rather, it's supporting all of them, and they're all maintaining a good sales velocity and good sales ranking.
Yeah. So there you go. So I think, like, the interesting thing is, like, okay, best practice says to segment. Well, actually, no, like, best practice doesn't give you any specific recommendations. Best practice tells you to, like, look at what's going on and then make adjustments based off what the data is telling you. So like that's the big thing. Again, like we're in like the stratosphere in terms of like optimization maturity here. Like really looking at stuff and asking ourselves like, why is it doing this? And like,
Yeah.
let me try something else. So like campaign structure, I think is, I think a lot of people get stuck in the sort of like intermediate phase of Amazon marketing because like they're looking for like the prescription, like just tell me what to do. And I think like you never become advanced unless you look at situations like this and you scratch your head and you're like, well, let me try this other thing and see what happens. And that's sort of exactly what we're talking about here. Best practice would say single product campaigns because you get the most segmentation, you get to control, your budgets and your search modifiers and your bid placements for per product. And as soon as you start grouping them, you lose some of that benefit. Well, in certain situations, maybe things are going in and out of stock. Maybe you're having variations split in and out. It's actually of your benefit to combine some of these things. And, I was looking at the campaigns with you, reviewing some of this, and you still have it incredibly segmented, except you didn't segment the products. So you didn't say, okay, let's take 4 products and put them, individually into 4 separate campaigns. And then, I'll have like 3 campaigns for each one. So like 12 campaigns total. You didn't do that, but you did segment a lot. This sort of product grouping, this 4-pack of products that we talk about, they're in 54 places in the account right now, which is a lot of segmentation. Tell me a little bit about your thought process there, like, for the good people at home, like, or in their car, or I don't know, cleaning their garage out. For the good people out there, like, how did you approach that segmentation? Because it's a lot of different types of campaigns. Talk to me about your thought process with approaching that and how you implemented it.
Yeah, for sure. And it is there's a lot of campaigns here, and I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to lie and say it's not complex, because it is, and we're trying to support it in every way, shape, and form that we can. And we continue to add layers all the time. For example, Amazon always likes to throw out additional campaign ad types. So we test those as soon as they become available.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that some of them worked great and other ones just completely flopped. So, there's some more adjustments there, but it's always that. It's going back to that thought process that you said, always be testing, always be trying, always be adjusting. So with the segmentation that we have here, yes, we have a whole set of them that are across the gamut. We have sponsored products that are just keyword straight up, product targeting, we have category targeting, we're doing sponsored brands, sponsored brand video, sponsored display, even sponsored display video. We're running the gamut across the board. Defensive campaigns, just everything is aligned here and working in harmony to get the full coverage. Now we're doing that with the entire set, like you said, but then we're also even sub-segmenting that to break out some particular keyword and product targeting just on the individual ASIN level that we spoke about a little bit before. When there's one that's a priority, we push on that. We're able to push on that with those particular campaigns. And that's part of that whole 54 number campaign set. Actually, there's going to be more like 60 in the next week or so. So there's more places that we're segmenting out.
Yeah. So even within, like, you mentioned sponsored product category targeting, even within that, there's segmentation within that, like different kinds of things that you're targeting. I even saw that you're segmenting some autos as well. So like, I think sometimes it's like just loose.
Yep.
Sometimes it's substitutes and complements. Like, so like you're even segmenting that.
Yep.
What do you think the results would have been if like you didn't segment that? Like, because you having 60 campaigns for this sort of like 4-pack of products is a lot, but it seems to be paying off. What do you think it is about that that's actually helping you? Like, if I were to tell you tomorrow, like, hey, you need to cut this down to 10 campaigns, I want to force you to do that for whatever reason. Like, what do you think would happen?
We'd start to immediately lose ranking and sales velocity. And I say that because I think you need to take a holistic approach. And we always talk about that, right? we always talk about how to manage your campaigns and what you should be looking at. And of course, there's budget limitations, that everybody has, but it's how can you use your budget most effectively? The most effective way is for us to take some of our leading products, which this is one of them, and really hyper segment. So, like for example, we're even using like audience, like in market audience, and then contextual.
Nobody uses those.
It's like we're using that too, right? So it's like we're trying to hit every available opportunity, and we're seeing that. I mean, and this is always be testing. Go back to that. Is some of the stuff is just working incredibly well that you don't expect to be working. So it's like, well, let's tweak here, and then there's another iteration of that campaign set that happens, and then we dig in and double down there.
Again, it's like the difference between like an intermediate and an advanced marketer here. Intermediate beginner is like looking for a list, like
Sure.
give me the 10 campaigns to launch. And it's like, well, actually you begin to like, as soon as you start to spread into every like nook and cranny here, it's like, oh, actually like you can segment all of, if I were to give a list of like 10 campaigns to launch right now, you can take all of 10 of those and like segment them out even further. So like by match types, what's a competitor term? What's a branded term? Defense, defensive search based, defensive ASIN based, of course, sponsor brand, sponsor display, sponsor brand. Like the list is a lot.
Yep.
And it doesn't really get talked about too much. And I think there's some, sort of caveats here that like you need a product with enough demand. Sure. And you need sort of the budget to support all these things, because it doesn't make sense to launch these with like a $1 a day budget. So there's certain things that need to come into play. But with all that said, the principles are going to be the same regardless of the size. Like you want to be pushing into every nook and cranny, because there's always going to be opportunity here.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing too that you were talking about, just who's supporting it and what you have, those parameters. Another one is the client. I mean, I do talk about that all the time. This client is one of the best I've ever worked with, and just them to have that flexibility to be able to be on board with it. Like, yes, we're going to test these 5 additional campaigns next week. This is the goal. This is what we're going for, and we're going to carve out this amount of budget, and we're going to test it. And they're on board with that 100%.
Yeah. Did you ever see, it's like a bell curve, and it's like the path of like, it's like the path of learning. And it's got like the beginner who says like, man, I don't know anything. And it's the beginner's like crying. And then like you go further and you learn a little bit more. And then the person's like, wow, I learned everything. And then you go further to like the truly advanced person, and the advanced person is crying just like the beginner, where it's like, wow, I don't know anything. So I think this is a perfect example. Like this is, if there's ever been a better argument to like never stop learning, like it's this right here. Like the biggest difference between like an intermediate and an advanced marketer here is just like, we want to look for, when you're getting started, it's so important. Like you don't know much. So like you need the tip, like just go launch these 5 campaigns.
Sure.
Okay. That's great. And then like when you're an intermediate, you start to realize like, oh, like I know the perfect blend of those 5 campaigns. And then when you sort of go into the more advanced, mature stage, you're less like, well, maybe sometimes it's 25 campaigns, maybe sometimes it's 54 campaigns. And it's like, maybe those 5 campaigns don't work in this case, but maybe they work somewhere else. And it's like that kind of thing is really, that's like the story of this. And now you have 4 products in the top 10, and you're absolutely crushing it.
Thanks. Yeah, we want to keep crushing it. So, I mean, there's more plans that are coming out, and part of this demand that we have is seasonally based. So we're prepping for us to shift seasons here pretty soon. And as you said, we're kind of now into February, and we're going to start hitting warmer weather pretty soon. So that we're going to be at a different place, and pretty quickly here. So super interesting.
Well, right on. Well, Michael Tejeda, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think people have a lot more campaigns to launch after this episode. Just go nuts. Just brainstorm. What are you missing?
Exactly. Do it.
Yeah. Have a good one.
All right. See ya.